Part 1. Secrets in the Palace. In 1547, the skies over London were as grey as a funeral pall shrouding the kingdom. Henry VIII, the monarch who once made Europe tremble with his ambition and cruelty, had passed away. The church bells tolled, not only to bid farewell to his soul, but to herald a new era. The reign of Edward VI, a 9-year-old boy destined to ascend the throne of England. Within the cold stone walls of Whitehall Palace, steeped in whispers of power and betrayal, the air was taut as a drawn bowstring. The common folk murmured about the young king, seen as a beacon of salvation for the Tudor dynasty after years of turmoil. But in the shadows of the palace corridors, a dark secret lay in wait, poised to shatter all hope. Edward, with his pale golden hair and piercing blue eyes, was unlike any other child. He did not frolic in the palace gardens or laugh while chasing hounds like his peers. Instead, he spent hours alone in his study, poring over weighty tomes of theology, philosophy, and history. His attendants, though they bowed reverently, whispered about the young king's gaze, a gaze not of innocence, but as sharp as a blade, as if he could see through their very souls. Edward was more than a child. He was a symbol of hope, the answer to Henry VIII's prayers for a male heir. Yet that very expectation was sowing the seeds of a coming storm. The secret letter. It all began on a frigid winter night, mere days after Henry VIII's funeral. In the sealed chamber of the late king, where golden tapestries still carried the scent of medicine and death, a servant named Thomas Wren, a gaunt young man with trembling hands, stumbled upon something he should not have known. While clearing old papers from Henry's desk, Thomas found a small wooden box secured with a rusty iron lock. Curiosity overcoming him, he pried it open with a small knife, revealing a letter sealed with red wax bearing the royal crest. The letter, written in faded black ink with a trembling yet resolute hand, was penned by an unnamed advisor. Its contents sent a chill down Thomas's spine. "Hear ye, House of Tudor, the ancient prophecy, a young king, born of blood and pain, shall lead England to eternal glory or plunge it into the abyss of destruction. His power shall be the light that guides or the fire that consumes the kingdom. Only the blood of his own line shall decide his fate." Thomas, though uneducated, knew this was not meant for his eyes. Fear did not stop him from whispering the tale to a friend, and soon the story spread like wildfire through the court. Before long, courtiers began murmuring about the prophecy, the young king, and his mysterious destiny. The Regency Council, led by Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, ordered the information suppressed, declaring that anyone mentioning the letter would face execution for treason. But it was too late. The prophecy had taken root in the mind of Edward VI. Edward and his destiny. Edward first heard of the prophecy from a maidservant who let it slip while brushing his hair. The boy, his face pale as marble, turned to her, his eyes gleaming with dangerous curiosity. "Say it again," he commanded, his voice sharp despite its unbroken timbre. Trembling, the maid repeated what she had heard. Edward said nothing more, only dismissing her with a gesture. But from that moment, a fire ignited in his mind. He became obsessed with the prophecy. Each night, as candlelight flickered in his study, Edward sat alone, scouring ancient texts for traces of the prophecy in theological and historical writings. He believed he was the young king foretold, that England's fate rested in his hands. Yet the prophecy also terrified him. What was the abyss of destruction? Could he fail? These questions gnawed at his mind, transforming the brilliant child into a soul consumed by power and divine mission. John Check, Edward's principal tutor, noticed the change in his pupil. Check, a Protestant scholar with silver hair and keen eyes, had spent years instilling in Edward the supremacy of Protestantism. He taught that Catholicism was the root of all sin, that the king was God's representative on earth, and that any who defied the king's will defied God. But now Check grew uneasy. Edward was not merely absorbing lessons, he was twisting them into something fearsome. During a lesson on preaching God's mercy, Edward interrupted, "Mercy is weakness. If God desires a pure England, we must destroy heretics without compromise." Check, though a zealot himself, shuddered at the 9-year-old's tone. Dreams of darkness. At night as Edward slept, strange dreams began to haunt him. In one, he stood atop a hill, surrounded by a radiant kingdom, with Protestant churches rising like towering spires. The people knelt before him, hailing him as God's chosen king. But then a colossal shadow rose from the horizon, swallowing everything. Churches crumbled, people screamed, and a voice thundered, "Blood shall pay for blood." Edward awoke, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. He told no one of the dream, not even Czech, but it fueled his resolve. Edward began to believe the darkness in his vision was Catholicism, embodied by figures like his sister Mary, who clung steadfastly to her Catholic faith. He started keeping a diary, recording his dreams and thoughts. One entry, written in his childish yet determined hand, read, "I must purify England before the darkness comes. If I fail, God will punish me, and the kingdom will fall." Conspiracies in the shadows. As Edward sank into dark thoughts, the court around him seethed with intrigue. Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, head of the Regency Council, sought to control the young king. Seymour, an ambitious man with dark hair and calculating eyes, believed Edward was merely a puppet to bolster his own power. But Edward was no pliable child. During a council meeting, when Seymour proposed a policy of leniency toward Catholic nobles, Edward slammed his fist on the table, his voice ringing out, "Compromise with God's enemies is treason. I will not let England fall to heretics." His words silenced the room. Seymour, though furious, dared not openly challenge the young king. Yet he began to see Edward not as a child, but as a threat. In secret, Seymour met with other nobles, plotting to tighten their grip on the boy. But rumors of the prophecy complicated matters. Some nobles believed Edward was truly God's chosen, and any move against him would bring calamity. Others, especially Catholics, began scheming to overthrow him before he grew into a greater danger. The stranger in the palace. One night, as Edward read in his study, a stranger appeared. He was a gaunt man in a black cloak, with eyes like twin voids. Calling himself Anselm, a former alchemist in Henry VIII's service, he claimed knowledge of the prophecy and offered to help Edward fulfill his destiny. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice a whisper from the grave, "I can show you how to see into the hearts of your enemies, how to purify England with fire and light." Edward, though only a child, felt an eerie pull toward this man. Anselm gave him an ancient leather-bound book, written in a language Edward could not decipher, yet he sensed its power. "This is the key," Anselm said. "Study it, and you shall become the king foretold." Edward kept the book close, reading it nightly, though its strange symbols made his head spin. Unbeknownst to him, Anselm was no mere alchemist. He was a pawn in a larger game of power, sent to manipulate or destroy the young king. The first confrontation. Edward's obsession with the prophecy soon led to an unexpected clash. During a ceremony at St. Paul's Cathedral, meant to bolster his image before the people, a man in the crowd shouted, "The young king will lead us to hell!" Before the guards could react, an arrow whistled past, missing Edward's head by inches and embedding itself in the wooden wall behind him. The cathedral erupted in chaos. Edward, though frightened, did not flinch. He stood tall, his eyes blazing, and commanded, "Find the traitor, he must pay." A manhunt followed. Edward, against Seymour's advice, insisted on overseeing the interrogations. A poor blacksmith was arrested for his alleged role in the assassination attempt. Under Edward's icy stare, the man confessed he had heard the prophecy and believed Edward would destroy England. Rather than defer to the council, Edward ordered the man hanged before the palace gates as a warning. "This is the fate of those who defy God's will," he declared, his voice echoing through the crowd. Seeds of darkness. The assassination attempt marked a turning point in Edward's mind. He began to believe England was rife with enemies, that the prophecy was not only a promise of glory, but a warning of those who would thwart him. He ordered the formation of a secret guard, the keepers of the prophecy, composed of loyal soldiers and scholars who operated in the shadows, monitoring everyone from nobles to lowliest servants. Edward also began to reshape his rule. Rejecting Seymour's moderate counsel, he ordered new laws drafted, mandating strict adherence to Protestant doctrine. Suspected Catholics faced interrogation, and harsh punishments were enacted. Edward, though a mere child, was sowing the seeds of a kingdom ruled by fear. In his diary he wrote, "The prophecy is my guiding light, but the darkness draws near. I must be strong, ruthless, to protect England. If not, my blood will be the price." End of Part 1. Part 1 closes with Edward standing on the balcony of Whitehall Palace, gazing over a fog-shrouded London. In his hands is Anselm's book, its pages whispering promises of limitless power. Yet within him, a growing unease takes hold. The dream of darkness returns, clearer now, with visions of a blood-soaked throne and the cries of thousands. Edward grips the book tightly, vowing not to let the prophecy fail. But deep in his mind, a question lingers. Is he truly the light, or will he become the darkness? The next part will plunge readers into Edward's rise as a youthful tyrant, with deadly plots, the enigmatic alchemist, Anselm's growing influence, and a tense confrontation with his sister Mary. The prophecy, whether true or false, will continue to drive Edward down a path of fanaticism and destruction. Part 2. The Rise of a Young Tyrant. In the spring of 1547, Whitehall Palace was steeped in a heavy atmosphere, as if its cold stone walls were closing in on dark secrets. Edward VI, now 10 years old, was no longer the boy who merely bowed to his advisors. His piercing gaze, which once chilled his courtiers, now carried a terrifying resolve. The mysterious prophecy found in Henry VIII's chamber, along with the strange book from the enigmatic alchemist Anselm, had ignited a fire of fanaticism in Edward's mind. He believed himself to be the divinely chosen light to purify England, but recurring dreams of darkness haunted him, fueling his growing paranoia. As the court fractured with plots and unease, Edward began his transformation from a young king into a fearsome tyrant. Fanatical education and the forbidden book. Each morning before dawn, Edward sat in his frigid study, the flickering candlelight casting shadows on his pale face. On his desk lay the ancient leather-bound book left by Anselm, the mysterious alchemist. Its strange symbols, written in an ancient tongue, seemed to whisper to Edward, drawing him into a world of power and secrets. Though he couldn't fully decipher their meaning, each touch of the pages sent a strange energy coursing through him, as if the book were fueling his divine mission. Anselm had promised it held the secret to seeing into the hearts of enemies, and Edward, with his sharp but impressionable mind, believed it was the key to fulfilling the prophecy leading England to glory or destroying all who stood in his way. John Check, Edward's principal tutor, grew increasingly alarmed by the change in his pupil. Check, a Protestant scholar with silver hair and keen eyes, had spent years instilling in Edward the supremacy of Protestantism. He taught that Catholicism was the root of all sin, that the king was God's earthly representative, and that any who defied the king defied God. But Edward was no longer merely absorbing these lessons. He was twisting them into something far darker. During a lesson on God's mercy, Edward interrupted, his voice icy. "Mercy is weakness. If God desires a pure England, we must eradicate heretics without compromise." Check, though a zealot himself, shuddered at the cruelty in the boy's tone. Edward's obsession extended beyond Check's teachings. One night, as the palace slept, he slipped into the royal library where books banned by Henry VIII for their ties to alchemy and magic were hidden. Guided by Anselm's cryptic instructions, Edward found a tome called Liber Ignis, the Book of Fire. It described ancient rituals to purify souls through fire and pain, captivating Edward. He began meticulously copying its diagrams and symbols, believing they would help him fulfill the prophecy. In his diary he wrote, "Fire will purify. If England must burn to become pure, I will be the flame." Conspiracies in the court. While Edward descended into dark thoughts, the court around him seethed with intrigue. Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, head of the Regency Council, believed the young king was a mere puppet to bolster his own power. Seymour, with his dark hair and calculating eyes, often proposed moderate policies to appease Catholic nobles, hoping to stabilize England. But Edward was not easily manipulated. During a council meeting, when Seymour suggested allowing some Catholic practices in rural areas, Edward slammed his fist on the table, his voice ringing out, "Compromise with God's enemies is treason. I will not let England fall to heretics." His words silenced the room. Seymour, though furious, dared not openly challenge the young king. Yet he began to see Edward as a threat. In secret, Seymour met with other nobles, plotting to tighten their control over the boy. Some nobles, particularly Catholics, began scheming to overthrow Edward before he became a greater danger. The prophecies' rumors complicated matters. Some believed Edward was truly God's chosen, and any move against him would bring calamity. Others, especially supporters of Edward's sister Mary, saw the prophecy as an opportunity to sow chaos. Edward, though young, was not as naive as the court believed. He sensed Seymour's discontent and that of other advisors. In a rare moment, he summoned Anselm to his study. The alchemist, cloaked in black with eyes like voids, bowed before him. "Your Majesty," Anselm said, his voice a whisper from the grave, "your enemies are lurking, but I can help you build an army of loyal followers to protect the prophecy." Enthralled by Anselm's words, Edward ordered the formation of a secret guard, the Keepers of the Prophecy. Composed of fiercely loyal soldiers and scholars, this group operated in the shadows, monitoring every move within the court. The assassination attempt. Tensions in the court erupted one summer day at St. Paul's Cathedral, where Edward appeared to bolster his image before the people. The ceremony was grand, with hymns echoing and sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. Edward, clad in a resplendent golden cloak, delivered a speech he had written himself, calling for Protestant purity. But amid the solemn atmosphere, a hoarse voice shouted from the crowd, "The young king will lead us to hell!" Before the guards could react, an arrow whistled past, missing Edward's head by inches and embedding itself in the wooden wall behind him. The cathedral descended into chaos. The crowd screamed, and guards shoved through to seize the attacker. Edward, though his heart pounded, stood unmoved, his eyes blazing, and commanded, "Find the traitor, he must pay." Under the direction of the Keepers of the Prophecy, a frenzied manhunt ensued. A poor blacksmith named William Holt was arrested, accused of the crime. In the interrogation chamber under Edward's icy stare, Holt confessed he had heard the prophecy and believed Edward would destroy England. Rather than defer to the council, Edward ordered Holt hanged before the palace gates as a warning. "This is the fate of those who defy God's will," he declared, his voice echoing through the crowd. The assassination attempt marked a turning point in Edward's mind. He became convinced that England was rife with enemies, that the prophecy was not only a promise of glory, but a warning of those who would thwart him. He ordered the Keepers of the Prophecy to expand their operations, monitoring nobles and commoners alike. Secret reports were delivered to Edward nightly, listing suspected Catholics or dissenters. He read them with relish, meticulously noting each suspect as if playing a deadly game. Anselm and the occult ritual. As Edward consolidated power, Anselm became an increasingly pivotal figure. The alchemist appeared at night, bearing strange vials and scrolls filled with symbols. He claimed his alchemy could reveal sin in human hearts, helping Edward distinguish friend from foe. In a secret chamber beneath the palace, Anselm performed a ritual he called the Fire of Judgment. A suspected Catholic was bound to a chair as Anselm poured a shimmering liquid onto their hand. When it ignited into a green flame, Anselm declared it a sign of guilt. The suspect screamed in agony, and Edward, watching from the shadows, smiled. The ritual horrified the court, but none dared object. Enraptured by Anselm's power, Edward ordered the Fire of Judgment used more widely. Public trials began, where suspects faced the flames before crowds. The people, initially curious, grew terrified of the young king's cruelty, but Edward was unmoved. In his diary he wrote, "Anselm's fire is God's light. The heretics will burn, and England will be saved." Mary's conspiracy. While Edward sank into fanaticism, his sister Mary quietly plotted. A devout Catholic, Mary was seen by Edward as his greatest threat. At a palace banquet, Edward publicly humiliated her, demanding she swear allegiance to Protestant doctrine. Mary, with steadfast eyes, refused. "I will not betray God," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. Enraged, Edward ordered her confined to the palace, but Mary secretly contacted Catholic nobles, preparing for rebellion. One night, an assassin disguised as a servant slipped into the palace with a vial of poison meant for Edward. The keepers of the prophecy uncovered the plot at the last moment. The assassin was captured and tortured, confessing that Mary had hired him. Though lacking clear evidence, Edward believed his sister was the mastermind. He ordered her confinement tightened and wrote in his diary, "She is the darkness in the prophecy. I must destroy her before it's too late." Seeds of destruction. The assassination attempt and Mary's perceived betrayal plunged Edward into deep paranoia. He ordered new laws drafted, mandating strict adherence to Protestant doctrine. Suspected Catholics were arrested and interrogated, often under Anselm's fire of judgment. Harsh punishments, from public humiliation to burning at the stake, became hallmarks of Edward's reign. The 10-year-old king had become a tyrant, ruling through fear. In a rare moment, Edward stood on the palace balcony, gazing over a fog-shrouded London. In his hands was Anselm's book, its pages whispering promises of boundless power. But the dream of darkness returned, clearer now, with visions of a blood-soaked throne and the cries of thousands. Edward gripped the book tightly, vowing not to let the prophecy fail. Yet deep in his mind, a question began to gnaw. Was he truly the light, or was he becoming the darkness? End of Part 2. Part 2 closes with Edward standing in the secret chamber, the glow of Anselm's fire of judgment illuminating his face, reflecting a deepening fanaticism. The court, once hopeful for a promising young king, now trembled before his cruelty. Mary, confined but unbowed, quietly prepared for a counterstrike. Anselm, with his enigmatic smile, seemed to guide Edward down an irreversible path. The next part will plunge readers into the story's climax, with the dramatic day of purification, a direct confrontation with Mary, and shocking revelations about the prophecy. Part 3. A Kingdom in the Storm of Faith. In the winter of 1548, England lay under a suffocating atmosphere, as if the heavens themselves trembled before the fury of the young king. Edward VI, now 11 years old, was no longer the boy who buried himself in books. His piercing blue eyes now burned with a fanatical zeal, as if he had fully merged with the mission entrusted to him by the prophecy. The strange book from the alchemist Anselm and the fire of judgment ritual had transformed Edward into a terrifying symbol, not just a king, but the embodiment of divine judgment. The keepers of the prophecy, his secret guard, had become a terror in the court and across England. Yet in the shadows, resistance was stirring, with Edward's sister Mary at its heart. Edward's reign, seemingly unassailable, stood on the brink of a religious storm he himself had ignited. A brutal surveillance system. The network of light, with Anselm's aid, Edward turned England into a kingdom of fear. He established the network of light, a clandestine intelligence organization run by the keepers of the prophecy. This network encouraged citizens to denounce each other for heretical acts, from praying with Catholic rosaries to whispering dissent against the crown. Informants were rewarded with gold, while the accused faced public trials where Anselm's fire of judgment decided their fate. The green flames, proclaimed by Anselm as a symbol of divine judgment, consumed not only bodies but the hopes of countless souls. At a trial in London's Central Square, a young woman named Agnes, accused of praying with Catholic beads, was bound to a stake. Anselm, his black cloak billowing in the icy wind, poured shimmering liquid onto her hand. As the green flames erupted, Agnes screamed in agony, but Edward, watching from a platform, observed intently, as if studying an experiment. "She chose darkness," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "The fire will lead her to light." The crowd, once curious, now stood silent, their eyes filled with fear. Such trials spread across England, from London to remote villages, turning Edward into a fearsome specter in the eyes of his subjects. Edward personally oversaw the network of light, reading each report delivered to the palace nightly. He meticulously noted suspects, categorizing them by their sins, and often ordered executions himself. In his diary he wrote, "The network of light is God's eye. No heretic can escape. I will purify England, even at the cost of blood." His fanaticism alarmed even John Czech, the tutor who had instilled Protestant zeal in him. Czech urged Edward to temper his cruelty, but the boy only smirked. "You fear the darkness," Edward said, "but I will burn it away." Anselm and the occult rituals. Anselm, with his deep-set eyes and enigmatic smile, became Edward's indispensable companion. The alchemist not only provided the fire of judgment, but introduced new rituals, which he called light of the soul. In a secret chamber beneath the palace, Anselm built a strange altar adorned with symbols from the Liber Ignis. He claimed the ritual could reveal hidden truths in the minds of enemies. Suspects, often nobles accused of Catholic sympathies, were brought in and forced to drink a potion concocted by Anselm. As the drug took effect, victims fell into delirium, muttering secrets or confessing imagined sins. In one ritual, a noble named Lord Harrington, accused of plotting with Mary, was brought forward. Under the potion's influence, Harrington babbled about a plan in the shadows to overthrow Edward. Edward, watching from the darkness, scribbled every word, his eyes gleaming. But when the ritual ended, Harrington died in agony, his body convulsing as if cursed. Anselm shrugged, saying, "Sinners cannot bear God's light." Edward, far from horrified, was exhilarated. He ordered the ritual used on all key suspects, ignoring his advisor's protests. "Anselm is God's tool," he declared. "He will help me fulfill the prophecy." Unbeknownst to the court, Anselm had his own motives. When Edward was absent, the alchemist met secretly with a mysterious messenger, exchanging coded scrolls. Though he feigned loyalty to Edward, Anselm seemed to be playing a dangerous game, steering the young king toward destruction. The feud with Mary. The rift between Edward and his sister Mary deepened. Confined to the palace after the failed assassin's plot, Mary refused to bow to Edward's cruelty. At a rare banquet where Edward forced her attendants to display his dominance, he openly challenged her. "You still pray to the Pope, don't you?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Mary, with unwavering eyes, replied, "I pray for your soul, Edward. You are walking a path to hell." Her words enraged him. He slammed his goblet on the table, ordered her returned to her chambers, and forbade anyone from contacting her. But Mary did not remain idle. From her confinement, she smuggled letters to Catholic nobles, urging them to rise against Edward. A secret alliance, called the Light of Faith, began to form, aiming to overthrow Edward and place Mary on the throne. One night, a messenger of Mary's was captured by the keepers of the prophecy, carrying a coded letter. After reading it, Edward flew into a frenzy. He summoned Anselm and ordered a special ritual to see Mary's plans. During the ritual, Edward drank a small dose of Anselm's potion, slipping into delirium. He saw Mary on the throne, surrounded by Catholic churches, as England sank into darkness. Awakening, he screamed, "She is the darkness in the prophecy. I must destroy her." Edward ordered a public trial to charge Mary with treason and heresy. He drafted accusations, from conspiring with the Pope to hiring assassins. But before the trial could occur, an unexpected event shook the court. A horrifying revelation. One night, as Edward pored over network of light reports, a loyal servant named Thomas Wren, who had discovered the prophecy's letter, slipped into his study. Pale and trembling, Thomas knelt before Edward and revealed a horrifying secret. He had overheard a conversation between Anselm and a former advisor of Henry VIII, disclosing that the prophecy was not divine, but a fabrication crafted by Henry's advisors to manipulate the dynasty. The letter was written to ensure Edward became a strong king, but it carried a curse. "Blood of the line shall pay for blood." Thomas begged Edward to stop, warning that his path was leading England to ruin. Edward, stunned at first, erupted in rage. He accused Thomas of treason and ordered the keepers of the prophecy to seize him. In the interrogation chamber, Thomas endured the fire of judgment, but insisted the prophecy was false. Before dying, he whispered, "Your Majesty, you are becoming the darkness." His words haunted Edward, sowing seeds of doubt about Anselm. He confronted the alchemist about the prophecy, but Anselm, with his cryptic smile, replied, "The truth lies in your majesty's mind. The prophecy is what you make it." Doubts about Anselm drove Edward to the edge of madness. He began having new dreams where his mother, Jane Seymour, appeared, warning of a deceiver in the shadows. Yet instead of relenting, Edward grew more determined. He believed only by fulfilling the prophecy purifying England could he banish the darkness. He ordered preparations for a grand event, the Day of Purification, where hundreds accused of heresy would be burned in London, a final declaration of his power. Public confrontation with Mary. Before the Day of Purification, Edward resolved to face Mary in a public debate at Westminster Palace. The debate, held before nobles and subjects, was a chance for Edward to solidify his image and humiliate Mary. Standing on his throne in a resplendent golden cloak, he delivered a lengthy speech, accusing Mary of betraying God and the kingdom. "You have one last chance to kneel and beg forgiveness," he said, his voice icy, "or you will burn with the heretics." Mary, with unwavering resolve, stepped before the crowd. She did not kneel but met Edward's gaze. "My brother," she said, her voice ringing out, "you have been led by darkness. I pray for your soul, but I will not betray my faith." Her words stirred the crowd. Some nobles, moved by her courage, began whispering support. Enraged, Edward ordered her seized on the spot, but Mary's loyal guards protected her, and she escaped in the ensuing chaos. Mary's escape was a severe blow to Edward's authority. He ordered a nationwide hunt for her while intensifying preparations for the Day of Purification. Yet within, unease gnawed at him. Thomas's words and dreams of his mother made him question, was he truly the light, or was he leading England to ruin? End of Part 3. Part 3 closes with Edward standing in the secret chamber, the glow of Anselm's altar illuminating his face, reflecting a mix of fanaticism and doubt. Beyond the palace, England cowers under the network of light's grip on every village. Mary, now a symbol of resistance, rallies forces to overthrow Edward. Anselm, with his enigmatic smile, seems to be luring Edward into a trap. The Day of Purification looms, promising a bloody climax. The next part will plunge readers into Edward's downfall, with a popular uprising, the final battle, and the shocking truth about Anselm and the prophecy. Part 4. The Fall of the Young King. In the winter of 1552, England lay under a grim pall, as if the earth itself groaned before the wrath of the young king. Edward VI, now 15, was no longer the boy with the piercing gaze that once made the court tremble. His body was frail, gaunt, with pale skin and sunken eyes, as if the fire of fanaticism within was consuming him from the inside. The mysterious prophecy, once a guiding torch, had become a haunting curse. The network of light, operated by the keepers of the prophecy, had turned England into a kingdom of suspicion and torture. Yet in the shadows, Mary, Edward's sister, was rallying forces to overthrow him. The alchemist Anselm, with his occult rituals and enigmatic smile, seemed to be pushing Edward toward the abyss. As the Day of Purification approached, the Tudor dynasty teetered on the edge of destruction. Illness and hallucinations. Edward's health began to deteriorate severely in early 1552. Persistent dry coughs, high fevers, and aching pains throughout his body made it difficult for him to leave his bed. The royal physicians, despite their diligence, could not pinpoint the illness. Some whispered of tuberculosis, but strange symptoms, falling nails, thinning hair, and an unnatural greenish tint to his skin suggested something more sinister. Within the palace, rumors spread that Edward was being poisoned with arsenic, possibly by Anselm, who regularly supplied him with purifying potions. In his fevered states, Edward was plagued by terrifying hallucinations. He saw his mother, Jane Seymour, standing in the darkness, her face sorrowful and hands blood-stained. "Edward, you are destroying everything," she whispered, her voice echoing from the grave. In another vision, he saw himself as a child, innocent and running through fields only for the boy to dissolve into a green flame, the flame of the fire of judgment. These dreams jolted Edward awake, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. Yet instead of fear, he saw them as God's test. "I will not be weak," he muttered, clutching the Liber Ignis. "I must fulfill the prophecy." Anselm, sensing Edward's weakening state, tightened his grip. He brought new potions, claiming they would enhance God's light in Edward's body. Though Edward harbored doubts about Anselm's motives after Thomas Wren's warning, he drank the potions, believing only the alchemist could keep him alive to complete his mission. But each dose seemed to weaken him further, plunging his mind deeper into delirium. In a rare moment of clarity, Edward asked Anselm, "Are you truly loyal to me, or are you the darkness in the prophecy?" Anselm merely smiled, replying, "Your Majesty, I am but a guide. Your fate lies in God's hands. The final plot, the day of purification. Day of..." Knowing his time was short, Edward poured his remaining strength into a final plan. The day of purification. This would be the grandest event of his reign, where hundreds accused of heresy would be burned in London's central square, a definitive proclamation of his power and Protestant purity. Edward personally compiled the list of victims, including nobles suspected of supporting Mary, commoners denounced by the network of light, and even former advisors of Henry VIII he deemed disloyal. In his diary he wrote, "The day of purification will be the final light, banishing darkness forever. If I must die, I will leave a pure England." Edward ordered Anselm to prepare a special ritual for the event, using symbols from the Liber Ignis to create a divine fire that would consume all sin. Anselm, his eyes glinting, agreed. But in secret, he sent letters to a mysterious contact, revealing that the ritual would not only burn the victims, but trigger a massive explosion, plunging London into chaos. Anselm, it turned out, was not only a spy for Mary, but a manipulator seeking to destroy the Tudor dynasty for a grander scheme. Within the palace, the keepers of the prophecy worked tirelessly to prepare for the day of purification. They erected pyres in the square, transported dry firewood, and oversaw the imprisonment of victims. But rumors of the event spread across England, igniting discontent among the people. Those who once feared Edward now whispered of rebellion, spurred by Mary's messengers. The uprising and battle in the palace. The night before the day of purification, a rebel group organized by Mary infiltrated Whitehall Palace. Led by Sir Robert Dudley, a young noble who once served Henry VIII, but now swore loyalty to Mary, the rebels, disguised as guards, slipped through the dark corridors, intent on assassinating Edward to end his brutal reign. But the keepers of the prophecy uncovered the plot at the last moment. A battle erupted in the palace courtyard, with the clash of swords and cries piercing the night. Edward, though frail, refused to flee. He seized Henry VIII's sword, a heavy blade with a lion-carved hilt, and ordered his guards to protect him. In a delirious state induced by Anselm's potions, Edward believed this was God's final test, that he must face his enemies to prove himself worthy of the prophecy. The battle led Edward to the palace's great hall, where he faced Sir Robert Dudley directly. Dudley, eyes blazing with hatred, shouted, "You've turned England into hell, Edward. Tonight I end your madness." Edward, trembling but driven by fanatic fervor, swung the sword with unexpected strength. The brief but intense duel echoed with the clang of metal. Edward, fueled by desperation, struck Dudley's shoulder, felling him. But before he could deliver the killing blow, rebel reinforcements stormed in, forcing Edward to retreat with his guards. The battle ended with the rebels' defeat, but the palace was heavily damaged. Edward, though alive, collapsed in his study from exhaustion. Anselm, emerging from the shadows, injected him with a new potion, claiming it would sustain him for the day of purification. But for the first time, Anselm's gaze betrayed a flicker of malice, chilling Edward. Anselm's betrayal. After the battle, Edward's suspicions of Anselm intensified. He summoned a loyal member of the Keepers of the Prophecy, a young scholar named Giles, and ordered an investigation into the alchemist. Risking his life, Giles searched Anselm's chambers and found a coded scroll revealing that Anselm was a spy for a foreign power, possibly linked to the Pope or Spain. The scroll also disclosed that Anselm had been poisoning Edward for months with arsenic in his purifying potions, weakening him while manipulating him to sow chaos in England. When Giles reported this, Edward was stunned. He summoned Anselm to his study, Henry VIII's sword on the desk as a warning. "You betrayed me," Edward said, his voice trembling with rage and pain. Anselm, shedding his cryptic facade, laughed. "Your Majesty, I did what the prophecy demanded. You wanted to purify England, and I helped you set it ablaze. Now let the fire finish its work." Before Edward could order his arrest, Anselm hurled a vial to the floor, creating a thick smokescreen, and escaped through a secret passage. Anselm's betrayal was the final blow to Edward's psyche. He realized the prophecy, his guiding star, might be a lie. Yet instead of relenting, he grew more resolute. "If I must die," he muttered, "I'll drag the darkness with me." He ordered preparations for the day of purification hastened, despite his failing health. The climax of the day of purification. On the morning of the day of purification, London's central square was packed with people, not out of loyalty, but fear. Hundreds of pyres stood ready, with victims, peasants to nobles bound tightly. Edward, supported to a high platform, faced the crowd in his resplendent golden cloak. But his body trembled and his voice was frail. He began his speech, proclaiming the day of purification as the dawn of a pure England. But before he could order the fires lit, a cry rang out. "Free the kingdom!" A rebellion erupted. The people, spurred by Mary's messengers, stormed the square, attacking guards and freeing victims. The keepers of the prophecy fought fiercely, but were overwhelmed by the rebels' numbers. Edward, on the platform, watched the chaos with glazed eyes. In that moment, a final hallucination appeared. Jane Seymour, sorrowful, reaching for him. "Stop, Edward," she whispered. "You still have time to atone." But Edward ignored her. He screamed for the fires to be lit, but no one obeyed. Guards fled, and rebels surged toward the platform. With his last strength, Edward gripped his sword but collapsed before he could fight. He was carried back to the palace, near death, as London burned in the uprising's flames. End of Part 4. Part 4 closes with Edward lying in his sickbed in Whitehall Palace, his body ravaged by illness and poison. Outside, the people's cries echo, heralding Mary's victory in the collapse of Edward's brutal reign. Anselm has vanished, leaving a shattered England. In Edward's mind, hallucinations of his mother and his childhood self mingle with memories of the failed day of purification. He clutches the Liber Ignis, but for the first time, he feels an emptiness. The next part will draw readers into Edward's tragic death, his belated remorse, and the dark legacy he leaves for England. Part 5, Death and Legacy, Spring of 1593, Whitehall Palace. Once the epicenter of Tudor power, now resembled a cold tomb where the stone walls echoed the labored breaths of a dying boy king. Edward VI, just 15 years old, lay on his deathbed, his body ravaged by disease and poison, bearing no trace of the child who once dreamed of a purified England. The day of purification, his final vision to cleanse the kingdom with fire and blood, had collapsed in chaos amidst a people's uprising. Mary, the sister he once despised, was gathering forces to claim the throne. Anselm, the alchemist who had led Edward down a path of destruction, had vanished, leaving behind a broken England. In his final hours, Edward faced the truth of the prophecy and the dark legacy he had left behind, not of light, but of shadow. A tragic death. Edward's chamber was cloaked in the dim glow of candlelight, the air thick with the scent of medicine and death. His once praised royal form had become a living corpse-ashen skin, shedding nails, thinning golden hair, like a ghost from another world. Pain tormented him endlessly, as if the very flames of the judgment fire he once inflicted upon others were now consuming him from within. The royal physicians, despite their efforts, could only shake their heads in helplessness. Rumors of arsenic poisoning, possibly by Anselm's hand, spread through the court, though none dared speak them aloud. In rare moments of clarity, Edward clutched the Liber Ignis, the book that once promised him limitless power, now a hollow relic. He stared at its strange symbols, seeking hope, but found only emptiness. Hallucinations haunted him more vividly than ever. Jane Seymour, his mother, appeared from the darkness with tearful eyes and a sorrowful face. "Edward, you let darkness guide you," she whispered, "but there's still time to atone." He also saw his younger self, an innocent child running through sunlit fields, laughing freely. The image pierced his heart, like witnessing a lost piece of his soul. One night, in a delirious state, Edward called for Giles, the last loyal member of the Keepers of the Prophecy. Gaunt and worn from months of conflict, Giles knelt at Edward's bedside. With a frail voice, Edward asked, "Giles, was I truly the light of God, or have I become the darkness?" Loyal yet honest, Giles could not lie. "Your Majesty," he answered, voice choked with emotion, "you tried to save England, but the path you chose brought only suffering." Giles' words cut like a blade. Edward signaled him to leave, and in the darkness, the boy king cried for the first time since his coronation. Late regrets. As death drew nearer, Edward began to face the horrors he had unleashed. Memories of public trials, the screams of victims under green fire, and the hatred in the people's eyes during the day of purification surged like waves through his mind. He recalled Thomas Wren, the servant who had warned him of the false prophecy, whom he had ordered burned alive in cruel resolve. He thought of Mary, once seen as an enemy, but now understood as a woman only trying to protect her faith. Above all, he remembered his mother, Jane Seymour, who died bringing him into the world. In a lucid moment, Edward wrote a letter, his trembling hand scrawling words not meant for any recipient, but as a confession. "Mother," he wrote, "I wanted to make England great, but only brought pain. I believed the prophecy, but it was all lies. I'm sorry for letting darkness lead me." He folded the letter and placed it beside Liber Ignis, a final farewell to his fanatical dream. In his final hour, Edward ordered Liber Ignis burned. Though heartbroken, Giles obeyed. The fireplace consumed the ancient pages, flames dancing in grim silence. Watching the fire, Edward whispered, "Mother, I'm sorry." Those were his last words. Edward VI died at dawn on July 6, 1553, his body decaying in agony, but his mind at last finding a fleeting peace. Aftermath, Mary's rise. Edward's death marked the end of a brutal reign. News of his passing spread swiftly, and Whitehall Palace, once a symbol of fear, became the setting of quiet celebrations among survivors. The Keepers of the Prophecy disbanded, many fleeing to escape vengeance. The Light Network, which once choked England with surveillance and fire, collapsed within days as people stormed secret offices and burned the reports of denunciation. Mary, having escaped London during the uprising, quickly rallied her forces and marched on the palace. Backed by Catholic nobles and weary citizens, she declared herself the rightful queen. On her coronation day, the people of London, exhausted but hopeful, welcomed her as a symbol of new beginnings. She ordered the remaining execution pyres from the Day of Purification dismantled and granted amnesty to the victims of the Light Network. Yet she did not forget Edward's crimes. In a solemn address to the court, she said, "My brother was led by darkness, but I shall bring light back to England." However, Mary's reign was no fairy tale. Her Catholic reforms, though initially welcomed, soon led to the persecution of Protestants, plunging the nation into continued division. Edward's legacy of fanaticism and cruelty left indelible scars, making religious harmony a distant dream. The false prophecy. After Edward's death, a horrifying truth surfaced. Giles, searching through Anselm's belongings, discovered an old letter written by Sir William Paget, a former advisor to Henry VIII. The letter revealed the prophecy found in Henry's chambers was a fabrication created by Paget and others to manipulate Edward. Their goal was to mold the boy into a strong monarch to secure Tudor power against Catholic threats, but they never imagined it would lead Edward down a path of zealotry and destruction. Anselm, as it turned out, was a Spanish agent sent to amplify the fake prophecy and push England into chaos. With poisons and ritual magic, Anselm twisted Edward's mind, using him as a pawn in a grander scheme. After fleeing Whitehall, Anselm vanished without a trace. Some believed he returned to Spain, while others whispered he was a true sorcerer, swallowed by the darkness he served. Paget's letter was read before the court, horrifying many nobles who realized how deeply they had been complicit in Edward's manipulation. But the truth brought little solace. The false prophecy had become a real curse, destroying not just Edward, but England itself. Legacy and lessons. Though brief, Edward VI's reign cast a long, dark shadow over English history. He is remembered not as a promising young king, but as a tyrant consumed by fanaticism and lies. His Protestant reforms, once seen as beacons of change, became symbols of cruelty. The Light Network, the Judgment Fire, and the Day of Purification became tales of horror told for generations as warnings of unchecked power. Edward's legacy shaped both Mary's and Elizabeth's reigns. Mary, though determined to restore Catholicism, could not mend the fractures Edward left behind. Elizabeth, when she later took the throne, learned from both her predecessors' failures, choosing a more moderate path to balance Protestant and Catholic tensions. Yet even Elizabeth could not deny the scars Edward left would define England for generations. Edward's story remains a timeless warning about the dangers of absolute power, especially when placed in the hands of an unready child. His fanaticism, fueled by inhumane education and a forged prophecy, turned a once hopeful prince into a symbol of corruption. He believed he was saving England, but in the end, he only brought pain and division. A final ending. On a summer evening in 1553, Mary stood on the balcony of the palace, gazing down at a London slowly rising from the ashes. In her hand was Edward's final letter, his shaky handwriting a late plea for forgiveness. Mary closed her eyes, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Let my brother rest," she whispered, "and let England begin to heal." She ordered Edward buried with respect, but no monument would be raised in his honor. His legacy, she knew, needed no statue to be remembered. Far from London, in a quiet village, a man in a black cloak appeared in the shadows. He placed an old leather-bound book at a church's doorstep and vanished. When the priest opened the book, he found only blank pages, as if all secrets had been erased. But in the wind, a voice whispered, "Blood has paid for blood." The story of Edward VI, tragic, terrifying, and unforgettable, had come to an end. But its scars would echo through history, a reminder that light and darkness dwell in every heart. Thank you for listening to the tragic tale of Edward VI, a young king misled by a false prophecy and consumed by fanaticism. If you found this story compelling, please like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating historical narratives. The secrets of Tudor England are far from over, and we hope you'll join us as we continue uncovering them.